This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm your host, co-founder, and editorial director of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, Jamie Bogner. This is episode 233, and we are in Belgium again. Joe Stang is co-hosting with me.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
And Urbain Coutteau from Struise Brewers is our guest on the podcast today. Welcome to the podcast, Urbain.
Hi, all.
We came into this thinking we were going to talk about Belgian dark strong ale, and after walking through the brewery before the podcast, it spurred a whole new line of questions because Urbain and Struise have built a beautiful brew house that is working in a unique kind of way, from mash into boil with parallel systems, multiples of smaller gear, and also a very dedicated approach to building sustainability in the brew house with a water system that retreats water and keeps their water usage incredibly low. And it's a carbon negative brewery. Very, very much ahead of the time. I'm excited to talk about all of those things and how you have built both the creative brewing side of the brewery, but also the technical and sustainable side of the brewery. And we'll talk about both of those things through this episode. But first, for nearly 30 years, G&D Chillers has set the mark for quality equipment you can rely on. G&D stands above the rest as the only chiller manufacturer that engineers your glycol piping for free. G&D also stands alone as the only chiller manufacturer with an in-house team of installers and engineers with 30 years of real-world field labor experience in breweries, wineries, and distilleries. Contact the Total Glycol System Design experts today at gdchillers.com. Also, this episode is sponsored by BSG Craft Brewing. Explore a whole universe of hop sensory with unique varieties like Cashmere, Comet, Triumph, El Dorado, and many more. Sourced directly from growers and processed at BSG's FSSC certified facility in Yakima to bring you only the very best hops from farmer to fermentor. For contracting, spot sales, and more info, reach out at Let's Talk Hops at bsgcraft.com. Urbain, we normally start off the podcast with a little bit of background and history. Why don't you walk us through yours, how you became a brewer and the story of Struise Brewers?
Long story short, we started in 2001 developing some homebrew beers at our ostrich farm. 15 minutes from here. I think Joe.
I was there,
one
time. Yeah.
That were the early days. Little pilot setup, developing some stuff for the guests that were staying at the farm. And some of these people would say, time to go commercial, Urban. So what we did was find a brewery that would want to let us brew our beers. At first, we started at Collier in 2003, about 100 kilometers from here. Distance and technical problems made us decide to come closer to home. And that's when the Deca area started in 2005.
And you brewed at Deca for a while, right? How long were you there?
From 2005, we were active at Deca until late 2014. It took us that many years to put some money on the side and start our own facility. Well, very small facility, but we came here in the school around 2009. Took us 3 years to build the brew house. Started brewing in 2012 on a 100% RVS system. While at Deca, we were working on copper. So it took us another 2 to 3 years to, let's say, align the different flavors. And we stopped brewing at Deca early 14, bottled about the last beers around the end of 14. And since then, we have been working independently on our own beers here.
I think thinking back to those like late 2000s, I was living here at that time, and I remember going to the Zitos festivals, and it was like always a crowd around you guys. Like that was, and it was also just thinking about that was also like the big years for rate beer also, and so there was a lot of a cool community conversation about beer and about big flavors that you guys were doing at that time. So I wonder if you want to talk about some of those beers that like got people excited back then and still get people excited.
At the time, the beer scenery in Belgium was, I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, but it was quite dull. And we kind of brought a new kind of flavor and aroma wave with the styles that we were brewing at the time. And a lot of new young brewers have followed our footsteps since then.
What was the drive then to create a new brewery? Obviously, you had this idea that you could bring more flavor to it, but starting a business is a whole challenge compared to making beer at home. It's one that you all worked through brewing at other breweries for the first decade of the brewery's life. But that also gave you a chance to learn as you went and learn from other breweries. But why build a business around that?
We were entrapped. We had this creative urge to put more flavor and exotic aromas in beer. And due to the enthusiasm of the people that drank our beers, we kind of were entrapped in a system we have never came out of. It has always grown to more, not more in volume, but let's say the difficulty has grown. We do a lot of barrel aging. We get casks from around all the smallest parts in the world. Name one, we probably have it. And this gives additional flavors to beers we couldn't even dream about. So once you're in this kind of water, or once you're in such a tub, a bathtub, you don't even question yourself of ever coming out of it, right?
Sure. As you were, now the brewery, for most of us who are familiar with it, is known for two primary beers like Pannepot and Black Albert. Talk to me about how you formed the ideas for brewing those beers. If the beer scene was, as you mentioned, less inspired by that flavor as you got started, how did you develop ideas for the recipe, flavor, and process to make those beers?
If you look at the beer industry in Belgium, you'll find you'll find a lot of dark quadruples. Well, thinking back around 2000, 2005, you will find a lot of quadruples, dark quadruples that are very popular, but most to none, zero stouts. And it was my way or the highway. So I said to myself, if we bring out the stout today, nobody will want to drink it in Belgium. So Pannepot was at the time a hybrid between a dark quadruple a strong ale, and a stout. It was kind of a bridge to grow, let's say, Belgian beer enthusiasts towards stout drinking, but still with the label of a strong ale. That was my approach. And it still is today, let's say, for somebody that starts his adventure in let's say, artisan beer or craft beer. I don't know how you call it these days. A lot of people still cannot get the hang of a typical stout immediately. You have to, kind of put this bridge so that people can grow towards bigger flavors, bigger mouthfeel, more bitterness. If you look at the tasting palette of the typical Belgian customer, at that time, that taste palette was grown very sweet. Where 20 years or 30 years earlier, you would still find beers with a level of sourness in it. In less than 2-3 decades, all that sourness was gone, and you would only find a lot of sweet beers. So it was our idea to break that evolution, which is very dull.
Sure.
It's still such a distinctive beer, Pannepot. It's there's still no other beer like it in Belgium. I think with this, we're talking about the Belgian taste for sweetness, and it has sweetness. It's also spicy, but unlike a lot of other spicier Belgian ales, there's enough. Maybe, and this is where the stout part of the DNA comes into it, but there's enough malt to contain it, and so I find myself always enjoying the beer, and somehow it all works out in balance. And is this part of the stepping stone or the gateway of it? It's a bit sweet and a bit spicy because that's familiar, or is there also some story behind that too, regionally, as the fisherman's ale?
Well, with every beer we brew, there's always a story behind it. For Pannepot, it's quite easy. Carlo's family owned one. So Pannepot is actually a sailing vessel from a century ago that would land on the beaches of a village called De Panne. And at that time, a lot of fishermen's wives would brew a concoction that would resemble to a Pannepot today, but not exactly. Talking to relatives from Carlo, we were able to kind of find out more about the flavors that drink would have, which they would brew on a wood stove, and then just pour into a wooden barrel that would sit in the cellar of their small houses. And from there, they would the day after they would tap out liquid, which they would blend with some egg yolk and a little bit of sugar, which would give them the energy just to get through their hard labor days. That's the story. So since then, what has changed? For our beer Pannepot, we don't add yolk to it, nor sugar. But it let's say that the story of the fisherman's ale still stands today. I remember when I was a kid, my grandmom in wintertime would take a dark quadruple from a brewery here in the area and would add egg yolk to it and sugar, and we would have to drink it because it would give us energy. It's a story that still stands today. When the elderly hear it, they will recognize it.
So that story helps connect this beer that itself is a bit of a departure from the normal quadruple and strong, this combination of beer. That makes a connection to history that makes people want to potentially try it. But I want to talk about flavor-wise how you changed, how you added elements to the recipe to span that dark ale and stout and quadruple kind of territory. Before we do that, are you looking for innovation in your next beverage breakthrough? Think outside the puree box and let your brand stand out. With Old Orchard's craft concentrate blends, even smoothie seltzers can benefit from the extra boost of flavor and color. Old Orchard is based in the greater Grand Rapids, Michigan area, also known as Beer City, USA, and supplies craft beverage categories ranging from beer, wine, and cider to seltzer, spirits, and kombucha. To join the core of Old Orchard's brewing community, learn more at oldorchard.com/brewer. Also, as craft beer's most trusted point-of-sale system, Arrived is the mobile, all-in-one solution you need to decrease service friction and increase guest satisfaction. With a full suite of craft-specific features, no contracts, and no monthly fees, Arrived provides the necessary tools to help your brewery grow. Go to Arrived.com to set up a free, customized demo. That's Arrived.com, ARRYVED.com. Remember, there is no I in Arrived. Let's talk about the recipe itself and what steps you took with the beer recipe in order to move it to this bridge beer, as you called it.
Well, if you take the typical beer recipe for dark quadruple or strong ale, if you want more chocolate and coffee notes towards it without being too aggressive, you have to add malts in your recipe that are darker. Sounds stupid, but
sounds logical.
The only thing we did, we added some C500, some C900. So C500 would kind of give those subtle coffee flavors. C900 would add some chocolate flavors. And then without going over the top, we would just add a little bit of C1400, which is about the darkest malt you can get. But never overdo it. Just,
just a little bit.
Just a little bit.
Handful?
Well, a little bit more than a handful. But, today there aren't any secrets anymore. If you really want me to give you a hint, I'd say on a 3,000 liter batch of Pannepot, we'd add some 8 pounds of C1400. That's a handful in a home brew batch.
There's also a typical quadruple would have plenty of dark sugar in there to lighten it up too and add its own flavors. My impression of Pannepot has always been it's a little bit beefier, a little bit more malt based than sugar based.
That's correct. That's correct.
So how are you bridging those darker roast malts with the base of that beer?
The percentage of, let's say, industrial sugar, can't find another name for it, would be no more than 5% in the recipe. And that gives us this typical malty mouthfeel when you drink Pannepot. When you go higher in percentage of industrial sugar, you easily get this typical, annoying, astringent sensation around 10% and more. So my advice would be stay under 10, way under 10%. 5 is better. And that would be because we want to give this additional flavor of candy, for example. We use candy sugar, dark candy sugar in Pannepot. And also that brown sugar, dark brown sugar, where candy sugar is liquid and brown sugar is
crystal.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. How much of a component of the beer would be that candy sugar and brown sugar?
Well, if 2 minutes ago I tell to you that we only use 5% in Pannepot, it's not a lot.
Yeah.
I think the usage of the two elements is about 50-50. So
yeah,
I think that you get that nice. I don't know. The beer still gives you this big malty hug, and it also as a sort of a cushion for the spicing in there. Can you talk about the spicing? I think it's like a really distinctive kind of. There's plenty of Belgian beers are spiced, but usually not this way.
That's where our house yeast comes to play, because we don't use any more spices in our Pannepot. We stopped doing that in early 2012. We were kind of experimenting here at the school and having a lot of aligning trouble between the copper brewing station at Deca, which gave us so much more flavors than the stainless steel setup here at the school. So we were on a voyage to compensate those flavor differences, and our house yeast that we use in Pannepot comes from the peel of a plum from the southwest area of France, where an old physics teacher from me was able to isolate a Saccharomyces cerevisiae on the plum, and we have been using that since then for Pannepot.
I used to drink a fair amount of Pannepot, and I haven't, as I said when we sat down, I haven't tasted it in years. Probably if I had them side by side, maybe I would figure out, but I would not have known that it's unspiced. The yeast, the house yeast that came from this plum, this is incredible. How would you describe its profile? Like if it was in a neutral beer, what does it bring to the beer?
Well, it has certain characteristics that would change in function of fermentation temperatures and in function of the amount of hops we use in a recipe. So it was a learning phase for us too. It would act differently, for example, in a beer where the IBU footprint would be around 30 IBU, and would change where in a recipe of 10 IBU, and then the temperatures are very important. The more we would ferment at higher temperatures, like we used to do at Deca, it would kind of overspice the beer as a reaction to the higher temperature. So where at Deca we used to ferment around 27 degrees Celsius, today it's between 18 and 20.
Wow.
You still get that expressive profile out of that relatively low of a fermentation temperature.
It would be, we've seen that if we go over 20, we get into trouble. So we use, I think for a Belgian situation, we kind of use low temperatures. 18, 20 is a low standard for a fermentation of beer in our country.
Is it a phenolic yeast? Is that if you go higher, does that more of that come out, or what how do you get into trouble?
We get into trouble on different actions in the fermentation. We would get more stress on the beer. I define it as stress, fermentation stress. Maybe we need a scientist that could say, no, Urban, that's not stress, it's something else. But I'm not a scientist.
Do you think that's now related to the change in the way that you brew? Because now you have larger fermentation tanks and tend to do multiple brews over multiple days to fill one of those tanks, and you fill and pitch yeast, and then that steps up, and then you fill on top of that and continue fermentation. Does that lower temperature just slow down that initial fermentation just a little bit so that it doesn't get too far ahead when you add batches in the future days? Maybe that's a logic behind it.
I don't need to add anything more to it. Crazy how intelligent you are. You should come brew here. It's let's say that the way we brew here, we have kind of grown towards a situation due to our bigger fermentation tanks is where every brew day is kind of a starter for the batch we will brew tomorrow. That's one side of it. And then, of course, the higher you go in temperature, the quicker it ferments. So we kind of time, and there you're absolutely right. We kind of time the fermentation period in a 24-hour slot. So it kind of is active enough for the batch have brewed the next day, and that there's no more fermentable sugar left. So it needs that new batch to continue its voyage.
That makes a lot of sense. And Joe and I were talking about that while you were taking a break there, and and trying to think, because if you were fermenting faster, then that may cause stress on that yeast as you then it finishes and then waits for more beer or more wort to come.
Again, you're fantastic.
Let's use that as an entree to talk about that brew system, because it's such an interesting but also different approach to brewing. You have a mash tun that with a steel mesh inside that you can lift up and drain like a brew in a bag system that a home brewer might use. And you have 2 mash tuns and 3 boil kettles, as well as a very extensive approach to water itself. I don't want to talk about all of those things, but before we do that, from the rotatable pickup tube on Rogue Brewing's pilot brewhouse to the integrated hopbacks on Sierra Nevada's twin prototyping brewhouses, SS Brewtech has taken technology they invented, working with world-renowned industry veterans, and made them available to every craft brewer. To learn more about SS Brewtech's innovation list, head over to ssbrewtech.com. Also, are you looking for the tools to make your next improvements in process and quality control? The Mettler Toledo InPro 8630i is the ideal sensor for combined color and turbidity measurement in lautering, filtration, and phase shift operations. Robust, compact, and easy to handle, it supports consistency in beer processing. The InTap portable oxygen meter gives you readings wherever you need them, flexible in production for verification, while purging or for troubleshooting. It's your perfect helping hand. Contact Mettler Toledo today to find out more. Let's talk about this brewhouse design, because it's a very unique and specific, I shouldn't say unique totally, but it is a very consciously designed, not a normal brewhouse design for a brewery of this size, in that you have 2 mash tuns and 3 boil kettles. But it's designed to brew the way that you want to brew, and also designed within the constraints of the space that you're working in, also, so that it could grow along with you.
When you're working in a small area like we have, we tend to do some, let's say, homework and exercises to augment our efficiency. And that's how we came to the idea of a kettle in a kettle. Grandfather didn't exist at that time. And nor didn't all the others.
Yeah.
So if I may make, let's say, an educated guess, I think they probably saw it here at Struise.
Like on YouTube or people talking about what they saw here, about what you're doing.
Yes, a lot of videos have seen the daylight on the internet of the kettle, the inside kettle with the attached lauter plate coming out of the outer vessel with a hoist. That was back in 2012. All those companies didn't do that yet.
Sure. And now there are folks like Brouwers and others that are making commercial scale systems that look like yours. And then, of course, on the homebrew scale, many of them exist now. And in fact, most of the homebrew manufacturers are making similar systems now, just because it's a very convenient way to brew.
Well, whatever. Happy to have helped. So the advantage of the system is that we can brew up to 4 batches easily in a 10-hour time lapse, and only with two persons on the floor. That's fairly efficient. 10-hour time lapse, 3,000 liters of, 3,200 actually, of 10% Pannepot is quite a high volume for such a little system, small system on such a micro surface.
And part of the reason it's so efficient is because it's so easy, basically, to get those grains out of there, dump them out, get them out back for the farmers to come pick up, or however that works. But it's just, you don't have to spend a lot of time cleaning it. You get them out of there, and you can go on to the next batch. Is that right?
Of course. So let's calculate. So you insert 700 pounds of malts. You add water to that. With the ratio of liquid it sucks up, it doubles in weight. So that would mean if you don't have a system like that, which we hadn't in the early days, we had to shovel out 1,400 pounds of spent grains. That would take, if one person would do the job, that would take 30 to 40 minutes for that one batch. So we gained a lot of time due to that. There's a second interesting feature due to that. We can easily circulate wort from under the lauter filter back on top of the mash bed without executing pressure on the filter bed. And why is that? Because you have a layer of liquid between the inside vessel and the outside vessel. When you exert sucking pressure, the pressure is divided due to the fact you have this possibility of your liquid.
I can see that there's liquid on the side of the tank,
sides,
and that means it's not just pulling down on this mash bed and compacting it. Yeah,
we have never had a stock mash since the day we introduced that system.
Which says a lot with the amount of 15 to 18% beers that you brew that use a lot of grain.
Absolutely. We are specialized in high gravity beers.
Are you getting a richer wort from this? Because I would think, I mean, obviously with home brewers doing brew in a bag, it's always, you need to rinse your grains. It's sparging. And I suppose you could be there and rinse those grains all day long, but I think that's not what you're doing. You're going basically for this first runnings of this system.
One of the huge problems a brewer would have when he tends to wash out a stout bill is a huge amount of astringent flavors from the malt bed. So when brewers tend to brew stouts, they don't necessarily wash their malt bed to rule out those flavors. In other beers, it's less of a problem. But Black Albert being one of our most popular beers, we brew it a lot. Pannepot too. Those are beers that have a lot of dark malts in it. We need to be very cautious when washing the malt bed. How you call it? Sparging the malt bed. Yeah, sorry for that.
So you have this system, and then it lifts up the internal filter, and pulls the mash grains out, leaves liquid. You load into one of the 3 kettles that you have, and this way you can then quickly start another mash to brew. I mean, if you're going to do 4 turns on this brew house in one day and still finish by 4 p.m. or 1600, it's a very short amount of time to do 4 batches. Pretty amazing that you can do that with 2 people.
Keep score, 2 mash tuns, 3 kettles, 4 turns. There you go.
Absolutely.
All right.
What size are each of the kettles that you use?
The size is very small, 1,000 liter each, 3 vessels. Well, not exactly. It's 1,350, but we usually never go over 3,200 to prevent boilovers. We are brewing with gas fire.
Yeah.
So it tends to be quite, how you call that, active boils.
And one of the reasons you do that, you want that like direct fire for the caramelization in the kettle?
Yes, because that was one of the phenomenal features at Deca with their gas-fired engines. They could introduce those typical awesome Maillard flavors. So we had to clone that or copy that here. So that's why we use gas fire. But they tend to lean towards vigorous boils. So we never go over 3,200 just to be on the safe side. But there's one other very important thing about that mash setup. When we do 4 mashes, we do 4 step mashes. Being
yes. Oh, yes. I love steps. Go ahead.
Okay, so when you don't have the money to buy, that typical fantastic hydraulic arms that go through your mash.
Yeah, mash rakes.
The rakes and the steam fire you would add so you can step up in temperature. When you don't have all of that, then you need some peasant intelligence. So what do? Batch 1, we would mash in at 62. Batch 2, we would go to 65. Batch 3, 69.
Nice.
And batch 4 would be 72. So we get 4 steps at the cost of, peasant gear.
That's interesting. So it's actually 4 separate single infusion, single temperature, but you're getting a little bit something different out of each of those 4 parts of the wort.
Yes. And imagine for a second, we can make it even more awkward. Brew day 1, we would brew 4 batches of mash at 62. Brew day 2, we go to 65 for all mashes. Brew day 3, 69. Brew day 4, 72. So that means we have a whole different way of controlling our fermentation too. Because imagine for a second when you have your first brew day with a whole lot of fermentables, but at a very low alcohol level. That gives you the best results because you don't have any tolerance to deal with around the yeast you're using.
So you're going with these sort of more fermentable wort to start out as you're filling up this fermenter over these 4 days to get that yeast going, and then progressively you're giving it a little bit bigger challenge as that yeast gets more and more powerful.
Absolutely.
That is really cool.
So we didn't spend $1 million on gear. I used my gray cells. It doesn't cost nothing, but I'm getting $1 million results in how we are using our gear to get to the results that only those, breweries with a lot of technology can reach, and it's just basic knowledge.
Maybe that's a good place to segue into some of these other modifications we've seen around here. That obviously there's a lot of creative thinking going on in how can we save money, but the thing that's really happening also is it's more sustainable in terms of energy use in all kinds of ways and water use. So maybe you could walk us through some of those modifications you've made here, which we have written about these kinds of things at breweries. It's usually breweries much bigger than this, and usually there are solutions that you buy. Manufacturers make these, and this is something you guys have done some inventing around here, and it's really cool to see it on this scale. Can you tell us about some of those things that you've done here?
Well, you can visit 100 breweries. They all have the same problem: overusage of energy and max spilling of water. You'll see it everywhere. We had the advantage when we wanted to build our brewery that we have seen almost 100 breweries in the world before we started building ours here. So every positive feature we would see in a brewery, we would note it down, and all what was negative, we would say no, never in ours. And when push comes to shovel, you have to deal, when you don't have a lot of money, you have to deal with the fact if you don't have the money, you are not allowed to spend it, or you can't spend it. So you have to be, again, it's that peasant knowledge or peasant intelligence that comes interfering and say, look, you have to find a solution to go around the problem, but you're not allowed to spend a dime. That's how we, at a certain stage, we decided to install our own water treatment system. That was back in 2012 when we started digging here behind the building. And we installed a system that would work with injection of oxygen. Every 15 minutes it would inject. so that the enzymatic activity would go between aerobic and anaerobic activity. So,
And that's the wastewater.
that's the wastewater
treatment.
that would be treated. But once it's treated, it comes back through a certain amount of basic filters before going to our reverse osmosis station. And then it gets a UV treatment through this weird tubes we have nowadays, stainless steel tube with a UV light in it, and that's the last step of the aseptization of the treated water, which becomes then, after passing through the reverse osmosis, would become then pharmaceutically clean water. We stock it on the ground. We have our underground tanks, about 60,000 liters on the middle courtyard. And this would actually provide water for our bottling stations, which is known in a standard brewery to be the most spilling area of water, which is, to me, a very noble commodity these days. So what we do is we kind of created a circulatory system.
Sure, like a closed loop.
A closed loop, and we are always using that same water, well, with a little bit of even rainwater, because the rainwater we capture also goes through the filters, also goes through the reverse osmosis system and UV bulbs. So do we use a lot of water? Yes, but it's on a closed loop, so there's not a lot of water coming from the city. That's a fact.
We were talking earlier before the podcast, and you quoted me a number of like 1.5 liters of water used for every liter of beer that you produce. It's an astounding number because most breweries are many times that, and even I believe it was Anheuser AB InBev, that launched their goal to get their water usage down from the 3 or 4 to 1 range down into a 2.5 to 1 range. But you're already at a 1.5 to 1 range. And when you consider that, that means 2/3 of the liquid that's leaving is leaving in the bottle, not going into a out into the city wastewater or anything else. It's very, very efficient.
The basic problem with a brewery using water today is one gets taxed for the amount of water he's using that is actually shown on your water meter. So it's in the water invoice. So if you don't want to pay those taxes,
sure,
spend less water. So that was the basic thing.
You pay that tax when it comes in, and then you also pay a tax on what you send down out into wastewater also.
It's integrated in the water invoice.
Oh.
So when we created this closed loop with our own water treatment system, we were able to make sure the water we use is uniquely for the beer that gets bottled in the bottle, the wort that is kind of sucked up by the malts, the dry malts, and the evaporation you get during boiling time. So that's 1.55. 1 is in the beer, 50 is in the spent grains, and 5 is in the evaporation. That's it.
That's very cool. On the water subject, you also mentioned that you treat water with different water and mineral profiles, and then save these different mineral profiles of water in various tanks so that as you're brewing specific beers, you can blend those water profiles together to achieve exactly what you need for each beer?
Well, city water here in Vletteren is quite hard and has quite some irony, Javel-like flavors in it. So we have a deionizer, which kind of solves those issues. And then we have our reverse osmosis system, which kind of subtracts all the minerals out of that water. And what we do is we have a computerized water management system that for every style of beer we brew, it kind of chooses between three amounts of those basic profiles we have. One being the hard city water, then the deionized soft water, and then the reversed osmosis water without minerals. It's an algorithm I kind of worked out, where for stouts we need a lot of minerals, so it's easy. And the lower we go in color of the beer, the lesser minerals we want to have in that water. So it's fairly simple again.
For the record, that's the only computer you'll find in the brew house too. It's their consistency is based on routine and good planning, and there's. But for the water profile, you've got the computer. You
know why? At the time, after brew days, we would spend another 3 hours to do the water management. So one brewer would have to stay behind. So brewing at our facility is kind of a hard job. It's very manual. You have to focus all the time because you don't have those computers that do it for you. So you need to stay awake for at least 10 to 12 hours. And then after having done all that labor in temperatures that are, pretty high, brewhouse temperature is around 30 centigrade. So it's a short and t-shirt temperature. And after a 10 to 12 hour brewing day, one would have to stay behind for an extra 2 to 3 hours to do that water management, which we need the next day. So that's not labor intensive, but you tend to fall asleep in that moment of the day. So we have had water tanks that kind of ran over with water. You falling asleep, valves are open, and
right.
And then you would get a shower, for example, because one of the tanks would spill over. So we kind of inserted this small computer that would handle all of this, and that's an economy of labor, which gives us a 2-hour gain every brew day.
That's great. We should also note that you have a number of other efficiency measures, such as a heat exchanger pulling heat from the exhaust from the boil kettles that then heats up water and stores that in a tank to get it to 80 centigrade. In order to speed up heating and reduce energy use in future things. You are capturing what would be waste energy in many different ways throughout the brew house, even though it's a very small scale brewery, and that approach to efficiency is really exciting. We could talk endlessly about that, but I want to talk about high gravity brewing before we finish, because we've been drinking some of your high gravity beers, and when we took a break in the middle of this and you poured us a 300 IBU 18% beer, and we started, you're doing some interesting magic with fermentation to pull big flavors but still balance big flavors and get a great expression of alcohol despite these very large, very high ABV beers. So let's talk about that for a minute. Brewing a beer that's over 15% with that much alcohol, with that kind of fermentation, can easily get out of hand. How do you all manage first the fermentation piece for your high gravity beers?
You would need a yeast strain that could run a marathon.
Yeah.
Where can you find the greatest people on earth that run marathons?
Is it
Kenya.
I was just fooling around with you. It's a lame joke I tend to use, but the yeast strain we use comes from an American beer.
California?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You've tasted the beer, so you're a big analyst. That's why you know.
I'm sure it has nothing to do with the fact that you already told me what it was.
We use a strain called Chico Ale strain yeast. It's used by, I'm sure it's used by Sierra Nevada to make their base pale ale. But
We've heard of them.
Yeah. It's probably used by thousands and thousands of brewers, in America and around the world.
Well, the reason why we started using it was because it's such a clean yeast strain.
Right.
It doesn't it doesn't give an identity to the beer. It lets the beer be the identity it is given by the brewer that makes or builds his recipe. So it's a basic pale ale yeast strain, if I can add to that, but it's able to run marathons.
I think a lot of people would be surprised that it could run an 18% ABV marathon. How are you? I mean, is this part of the puzzle here with these layered fermentations you're doing by day 4? You got this rollicking party going on in there. Is that part of how you're getting to 18%?
This and other problems. Imagine for a second you were a yeast cell, and you're finding yourselves in that wort or that fermenting beer, and you would encounter different sugars of different lengths. And then, due to the identity you have, you would always search to ferment the most easy sugars first. And by the time there's no more of those sugars left, and you go find the others, your alcohol tolerance has become so small that you don't have the force anymore to attack those sugars. What do you think would be the result?
Stalled fermentation.
Voila. So what do we do when you ferment a high gravity beer like that at a lower temperature? You would give him the possibility to run a marathon.
Slow it down, pace yourself to make it through the marathon.
Yes, and force that yeast strain to attack the difficult sugars from day one. How do you do that? By making sure you have as less as easy sugars to ferment and as much as difficult sugars to begin with. So if you want it in technical terms, you have maltose and you have maltotriose. The last would be the most difficult of the two. But then you have the sucrose, which are the most easy ones. We tend to let those out. So I have to build in a correction here. While our first brew day would be a 62 to launch fermentation, our second brew day wouldn't be a 65 or a 69. No, we'd do a 72 in the second brew day, and a 69 in the third brew day, and a 65 in the fourth brew day. And that would be the best diet for that yeast strain to run that marathon.
Jamie, have you ever heard of anything like this before?
No. I'm enjoying this conversation immensely.
I love the way, Urbain, that you have a problem, and it's problems that every brewer faces, and you have this completely other way of getting to a solution. It's you're very much an outside the box thinker, and it explains so much about the beers as well as how this brew house is built.
It's about how our parents thought and our grandparents. If you look to history, there's always people that would solve problems with nothing. And that's what we have been forced to do for the last 20 years, because there was always one common denominator in the field, and that was a lack of money and capital. So you have to find ways to go around the problem without a budget.
Well, you've solved them in smart and sustainable and also delicious ways. Let's zoom out now as we're getting on to the end and talk about the big picture. The last couple of years have been very difficult through COVID. You've been able to host fewer people here at the brewery. You've had issues with an American distributor that went out of business and that has hampered your ability to get beer to some beer fans there. What are some of the short-term goals for Struise, and what is your big picture long-term goal?
If I tell you that the last 2 years have been a very turbulent ride, I don't want to whine about that, because probably everybody in the world has had the same problem.
Yeah.
While everybody has been very resilient in coping with Corona or COVID, whatever, how you name it, I think that the period ahead of us will be very turbulent too, because look at what it's doing to logistics. Look what it's doing to energy prices. It's running out of hand and out of order. Imagine for a second that you'd be obliged to spend all your money towards an electricity or an energy bill instead of consuming. That's, to my knowledge, a huge problem for an economy which could not be growing in the short term. You know, we need to draw a line and say, okay, we've conquered this. Draw a line under it and say, okay, start all over again today or tomorrow, but not within 2 or 3 years, because it'll be too late. But we have to start all over again today or tomorrow and do what we do best. Work, brew beer, in whatever industry you're working, doing what you do best, and make sure that, you know, we get a little bit of a stabilization again.
Right. It's something we've said many times before. COVID's a serious problem, but get vaccinated, be safe, take care of each other, keep breweries open, keep beer bars open, and let's keep the economy moving forward.
Of course. But we need to open society again.
Yeah.
I think 2 years is long enough, and I think the biggest storm is behind us. And okay, we know we're with a lot of people on this planet, and we know we have a lot to do. And okay, we know we need to be more cautious in the future. But with us knowing all of that, I think we can go forward again real soon. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's happening for us. I know when I return to Colorado from this trip that our statewide mask mandate will be off, and it'll be up to individuals to take care of themselves and take care of each other. And I hope we all do that again so that we can continue to get back to normal life again.
Colorado, isn't that the biggest beer state in the world?
There's a reason we live there. We could talk about this for a long time, but I think it's a good time to bring this to a close. For nearly 30 years, G&D Chillers has set the mark for quality equipment you can rely on. Explore a whole universe of hop sensory with unique varieties from BSG. Think outside the puree box with Old Orchard's craft concentrate blends. Arrived is the point of sale system designed specifically with breweries in mind. Put SS Brewtech's advances to work in your brewhouse. And Medler Toledo's InPro 8630i supports consistency in beer processing. If you enjoy the podcast, of course, we'd love your support. Go to beerandbrewing.com, click on the subscribe button. If you're planning a brewery, head on over to breweryworkshop.com for information on our next workshop in Portland, Oregon this July. Urbain, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today, sharing some beers with us, sharing your vision for brewing and building a brew house and sustainability. It's been fascinating to see the brewery and talk to you about this.
I was very happy you guys came along after a 2-year isolation here on our island. I was mostly happy to do this. Thank you, guys.
So cool to be back here in the classroom at the old school. Thank you for having us, Urbain.
If people want to learn more about the brewery, where can they find you?
We have a website called Struise.com. On the contact feature, you can get to us if you want to come visit us or have a guided tour. There are still possibilities to do that. Smaller groups, bigger groups. The moment you write us for that, we can get in touch with you and see how to solve your problem.
Thank you so much for talking with us. Cheers.
Thank you all.
This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.